in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Thursday, November 21st around here, and we have a great show for you today. We got to start talking about the big-time game going on in Columbus, Ohio. Indiana, Ohio State, a huge game this upcoming weekend that has gotten Twitter very, very mad over the last couple of days. Then we'll get into a couple of SEC games that might be a little bit upset alerty. We had Ole Miss going to Gainesville for a big game against Florida, as well as A&M going to Jordan-Hare at night to play Auburn. Two huge games that could totally shake up the CFP race. Then we'll get to the 12-team playoff, talk about some of the consequences that are starting to show from the 12-team. Obviously, nothing that is too aggressive, but definitely some things to be on the lookout for the next couple of weeks and really the next couple of years in college football. Then we'll get to Week 13 whip around. We'll get to all the top 25 teams, not quite all of them, but a lot of the big-time games that you're going to want to be watching for this upcoming weekend. Definitely a ton of them, including Miami, trying to bounce back after a bye week. Then we'll get to my hot takes around the playoff. I have a ton of different ones, including one around the auto buy system that I think we just probably need to do away with it. But we'll get into that all at the end of the show. Definitely stick around for that. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show. And the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use the super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click the $, add any question, comment you'd like. It'll pop up on the screen and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, so utilize that as you please. Also, GSMCPodcast.net is still up and running, does the exact same thing, so either one of those you'd like to use, please do, and we can have a fun back and forth here. But let's go ahead and jump into this one. We have Indiana at Ohio State. We finally have the game that everyone's been talking about like it's already happened for some reason. But let's start here before we get into any of the craziness of the actual game. I feel like I don't have an actual line of demarcation for Indiana. I can't tell you that if they lose by 15 plus, or if they lose by 20 plus, or if they lose by 24 plus, that they should definitely be out. I think I just have to see the game play out, see what the game flow is, see how they look against the athletes of Ohio State, see how their defensive line looks against a banged-up offensive line, which we'll get to here in a second. We'll have to see all of that unfold. I can't say, if they lose by 15 plus. I thought about saying, if they lose by 2 or more scores, that'll be about it for me. I don't think that's really fair. I want to see how this plays out. I want to see what Indiana has on Saturday. And then on Monday, I'm more than happy to give you my full breakdown and my full take about what I think Indiana should be. So I will get to that, no doubt about it. I will let you know on Monday if I think they should be a playoff team. As of right now, I think they should be. It could change on Saturday. It could change in the right direction. I think they should definitely be. So we'll battle back and forth on that on Monday, no doubt about it. But let's get to the game, because I feel like a lot of people have almost forgotten that this is a game that is going to be played on the field, which sounds crazy, I know. But at the end of the day, it's going to be really, really fun to watch. And the biggest news out there is Seth McLaughlin, the very talented center for Ohio State, is out for the year with a torn Achilles. He tore it earlier this week in practice, a huge loss for this team. This was an All-American talent type player at center. You might remember him from Alabama last year, had some snap troubles throughout the back end of the year, still was a fantastic player for Alabama and has been just remarkable for Ohio State. A huge piece in the run game, which we'll get to here in a second, and a ton of different stuff. So a huge loss, no doubt about it. The second starter that has gone down. They also lost their backup left tackle. So they've played around with a lot of stuff. Donovan Jackson kicked from left guard over to left tackle, has done a relatively good job considering that move, and now you're going to have to play around with stuff once again. Carson Hinsman is the guy that I'm watching most closely. He was at left guard. I believe he's going to kick over to center and probably play that center position, and then Luke Montgomery will slide into that left guard. I can't confirm that, but by looking at their depth chart, that's how I feel this would probably go. I'll obviously update you guys tomorrow if there's any news on that today, but definitely the way that I would assume it would go, but yet another switch around for that Ohio State offensive line, and yet another shift for a player possibly with Carson Hinsman going from left guard back over to center. So definitely something to watch, and for Indiana, that bodes well because they can really stop the run. They're second in the country in run defense, giving up under 80 yards per game. To be fair, this is by far the best running back duo that they're going to have, but if that O-line does give them the opening, they will take it and roll with it, no doubt about that. But then on the other side, you do have Curtis Rourke. Curtis Rourke just has to roll in this game, and I can promise you, we will get to the Joey Galloway take a little bit later in the show, but crazy. But we will get to that. The big thing about this is Curtis Rourke has to play the best game he's played at Indiana. He has to play as elite as he has really ever played football, if I'm being totally honest. He is going to Columbus. He's playing in a huge game that could send them to the CFP, could knock them out hypothetically. He's got to play elite football. This is why he came to Indiana. He knew that this game was on the schedule, and this is going to be a special moment for him, no doubt about it. But he's got to show up in a big way, and a big reason he does is, while they have the second best run defense, Ohio State sits at fourth. So it's not like Ohio State's very far behind them. They are very, very good, and they're plenty good on the back end, but they're really, really good against the run. They're one of the best teams in the country, and when you have those guys on the outside, like Elijah Surratt, like Miles Price, like Omar Cooper Jr., it might just be a better idea to see what you can do against this back end and kind of let your run game, I don't want to say take a back seat. You definitely will need it throughout this game, but definitely let it be a supplemental piece in this game. Use those big-time pass plays that you've been able to find, and use some of those one-on-one matchups that honestly might favor you in some certain situations that we can break down throughout this. But on the other side, you do have Will Howard. I think he's played really, really solid football all year, has had kind of some of those goofs, as people like to call them, a couple of mistakes here and there that have put them in kind of precarious situations, including in that Oregon game where the last play of the game made a mistake and obviously led to them losing. He has played very, very good, though. He has played very, very good football, very solid. The thing is, you're probably going to have to kick it up a notch, especially with the offensive line going down, especially with them kind of having to kick guys around. The quarterback run game is going to be a bigger part of this offense going forward, if I had to imagine. I do think they're going to attack that a little bit more aggressively, and he's going to have to step up to the plate. He's going to have to be the guy that they brought him in to be, and he was in the Penn State game for much of that game. He's going to have to be it again on Saturday and really going forward the rest of the season. One big stat to watch before we jump into the keys to the game, one big stat to watch could be red zone efficiency. Ohio State is number 2 in the country in red zone offense. They're number 2, and red zone defense, they're actually the best in the country. And then Indiana, they're actually number 1 in red zone offense, but they're 74th in red zone defense. Could that be the difference here, where you have one Ohio State drive that's finished off with 7 points, you have an Indiana drive that comes up with nothing, and that's the difference in the game? That definitely is something that could happen, but it's going to be really fun, partly because we won't really know the effects of it until 72 hours after, but it's going to have an impact, no doubt about that, and we'll see what happens to Indiana, to Tennessee, to Notre Dame, to all of the teams that are going to be watching this very, very closely, and we'll see what happens. But a couple players to watch. I think Justice Ellison, this is probably your game. Obviously, you aren't going to be able to run the ball quite as efficiently as you would like, because not many people can do that against Ohio State. That being said, you have 2 very good backs. You have Justice Ellison, you have Tyson Lawton, and I think both those guys can get downhill. They can play really physical. They can play against guys that are on the other sideline in Ohio State. So I think you have a guy here that maybe your run game is not going to be the marquee part of this game, and it probably shouldn't be if you're Indiana. But you need to get enough. And I think Justice Ellison's one of those guys that can fall forward, that can give you 4 yards when you blocked for 2, or give you 3 yards when you blocked for 1. And that's kind of the difference in a game like this, where it's just really margins and inches that will give you this win or loss. And then Michael Kamara. When he saw that news that Seth McLaughlin went down, I have to imagine his mouth started watering, because this dude is going to go to work on Saturday. He is one of the best D linemen, not only on Indiana, not only in the Big Ten, but in the country. He's been absolutely incredible, has rushed the passer very well, but also can be a force inside. An incredible, incredible player that absolutely can make Ohio State pay, especially with that offensive line struggling. Wouldn't be surprised if number 6 was just all over the field on the defensive side of the ball for Indiana. And then we got to talk about Carson Hinsman. When you are put in this situation, you officially are put on a huge, huge stage. Whether or not he plays center or guard, I'm not sure where he's going to play. I would assume center, but we'll see what happens there. Definitely going to be interesting to watch him. Regardless, he's going to be huge. They need a guy in the middle that can really be that enforcer. We talked about it earlier in the year, actually, when we talked about Alabama. Tyler Booker went out, and it's happened with Georgia, actually, with Tate Ratledge. You need a guy in the middle that can be an enforcer in the run game. You need a guy that can get that push, whether it's a guard or a center. They had it in Seth McLaughlin. They had 2 guys in Carson Hinsman and Tegra Shubila that are both kind of really solid guys. They need that enforcer again, and it's going to probably have to be Carson Hinsman, and we'll have to see what happens with him, but it's going to be a huge game on Saturday and really the rest of the season for this guy. And then Denzel Burke. We talked about it with Indiana. They have some dudes on the outside. They have dudes that absolutely can do one-on-ones with some of these quarterbacks for Ohio State, so they're going to have to show up. Denzel Burke, Davison Igbinosun, all of these guys are going to have to be big-time players, and this is the moment to do it, no doubt about that. But Some keys to the game. Indiana, you got to ignore the noise. This week has been absolutely insane. People are talking about you don't belong in the playoff. People are saying that you aren't that good. People are saying that you haven't played anyone. Block all that out. Just play the game in front of you. Play as good as you possibly can, and let the chips fall where they will. If you lose by 14 and you get left out, I would not be mad at you guys for yelling and screaming and saying that it's SEC bias. On the other side of that, if you lose by 21 and get left out, I might not be quite as with you, but I understand this will still be an incredible season. Just go attack Saturday. Leave all of that other stuff up to the committee and all that craziness. Just go take care of Saturday, and probably everything else will take care of itself. And then mistake-free football. Giving Ohio State free possessions in this game is a loss, plain and simple. If you're going to give that Ohio State offense with all of those playmakers as many possessions as they want, they're going to tear you to pieces. So, got to be very careful. Only 7 turnovers on the year, 4 INTs from Curtis Rourke. They should be fine in that category, but definitely the best defense that they've played thus far and the best at getting turnovers for sure. And then a 4-quarter performance. This is going to be the toughest game they've played from a physical perspective. There's going to be a fourth quarter unlike any that they've played all year because the body's going to hurt just a little bit more. So they have to be able to fight through the clock when the clock hits 0, because the reality is this one's going to hurt just a little bit more than some of those other games that you've played. And then for Ohio State, extend the run game just a little bit. I don't think they necessarily have to totally get away from it, but you are down 2 starters on the offensive line. You are going up against a very stout run defense. Spread it out a little bit. Get some pitches, get some screens, some different things to just get your playmakers on the outside, and that's actually my other key. Just let your playmakers go. There are so many different things that these guys can do in open space where you don't have to have Will Howard throwing the ball 40 yards downfield. You don't have to have anything outright special. Just let your guys go to work. Get them out on the edge very quickly, and then let your guys make plays in open space. They usually can make those plays. And then finally, I would trust your front in this game. I think Indiana is a very good team. I think they're a very solid offense. Running the ball is not necessarily their strong suit. 62nd in the country in yards per game. The offensive line is solid, not necessarily elite by any means. I think you just trust your front to take care of business there and then stop the big plays on the back end that could totally change this game, if I had to imagine, with all of the guys they have on that back end. So it's going to be a huge game over there in Columbus, one of the biggest games in Indiana football history. That is the losingest football program in college football history, but I think it's going to be another loss on Saturday. I would love to be sitting here and telling you that I think Indiana's going to win, but I do think Ohio State wins 34-17. I think it's going to be a fight, though. I really do think this is one of those games where Ohio State maybe scores a touchdown with 4 or 5 minutes left, takes it to 17, and never really looks back, but I do think it's going to get interesting, and I do think I'm going to be sitting here on Monday just racking my brain, trying to figure out if I think Indiana or Tennessee should be in that thing. But we'll see what happens on Monday. We'll see what happens on Saturday, and we'll break it all down on Monday, so definitely tune in for that. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we got to talk about Ole Miss, Florida. We got to talk about A&M, Auburn. A couple of upset alerts in the SEC, and we'll break them down right after this.